In the spring of 1944, German intelligence officers gathered around maps of Normandy with something close to dread. They weren't studying Allied tanks or bombers or infantry divisions. They were studying American artillery battalions. The reports coming back from the Eastern Front were already troubling. But what was happening in North Africa and Italy was worse. German prisoners kept repeating the same phrase in interrogations, over and over. Their artillery fire came too fast. OKW analysts documented it. Corps commanders reported it. Even Rommel mentioned it in his letters home. By early 1944, the Wehrmacht had a name for the phenomenon they couldn't explain. Feuerzauber. Fire magic. What they didn't know was that the Americans had spent a decade building something no army had ever fielded before. Not better guns, a better system. And by the time German forces realized what they were facing, it was already too late. The problem began at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in 1933. A young major named Orlando Ward was teaching artillery tactics to officers who still relied on French 75mm guns from World War I. The existing system required each battery commander to observe and adjust his own fire from a crude tower near the guns. It was slow, inflexible, wildly inefficient when multiple batteries needed to engage the same target. Ward proposed something radical: centralize all fire direction at the battalion level. By 1934, the Fire Direction Center, the FDC, was operational. It seemed like a minor bureaucratic change. German observers who learned of it through attaché reports dismissed it as American administrative tinkering. One Wehrmacht staff officer wrote in a 1936 assessment that the Americans were overly fond of complex procedures that will collapse under battlefield conditions. By 1942, every American artillery battalion had an FDC manned by specialists using graphical firing tables, slide rules, and synchronized communication nets. A forward observer could call for fire from any battery in the battalion or from multiple battalions simultaneously. The calculations took 90 seconds. The first rounds could be in the air in under 3 minutes. German batteries needed 15 minutes minimum to coordinate the same mission. The Germans first encountered American artillery in North Africa in February 1943. At Kasserine Pass, General Lloyd Fredendell's II Corps took a beating from Rommel's panzer divisions. American infantry broke. Tanks were overrun. It looked like a rout. But even in that disaster, something unnerved the German commanders. Rommel wrote to his wife on February 18th. An observation plane directed the fire of numerous batteries on all worthwhile targets throughout the zone. He meant _throughout_. German units trying to exploit breakthroughs found themselves under accurate artillery fire from batteries they couldn't see, fired from positions they hadn't located, adjusted by observers flying overhead in tiny Piper Cubs. The aircraft were almost comically vulnerable. The L-4 Grasshopper had a maximum speed of 85 miles per hour and fabric-covered wings. Luftwaffe fighters could catch them easily, but the observation planes flew low and slow over the front lines where German fighters, under constant pressure from Allied air superiority, couldn't safely operate. And wherever those planes appeared, the artillery followed. By late March 1943, Rommel's intelligence staff had a new priority target: American artillery observation aircraft. They shot down 11 in April. The Americans replaced them in a week. What happened next stunned the Wehrmacht. Sicily, July 1943. The 1st Infantry Division came ashore at Gela, supported by 12 battalions of artillery. German commanders expected the usual American approach: methodical, cautious, defensively minded. Instead, within 18 hours, American artillery was firing coordinated time on target missions. Tot shoots, where shells from multiple batteries arrived simultaneously on German strongpoints. The effect was devastating. A Tot mission gave no warning, no ranging shots, no gradual buildup of fire that allowed troops to take cover. Just an instant eruption of high explosives exactly when and where the American infantry needed it. German after-action reports describe sudden concentrated fire of inexplicable coordination. The first combat TOT shoot had been fired by the 25th Infantry Division under General J. Lawton Collins in the Pacific in early 1943. By Sicily, the technique was standard across all American divisions. The German 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, attempting to counterattack at Gela, reported losing 32% of its strength to artillery fire in 6 hours. Not tanks, not airstrikes. Artillery. The change was too rapid to be explained by experience alone. Between 1940 and 1943, the U.S. Army had gone from a force armed with obsolete French guns and horse-drawn limbers to an artillery arm that could mass fires from dozens of battalions, coordinate them through radio networks, adjust them from aircraft, and shift them in minutes. German artillery was still being moved largely by horses. As late as 1944, over 80% of Wehrmacht artillery units relied on horse-drawn transport. An artillery battalion could move perhaps 25 miles a day before the animals needed rest. American battalions mounted on M4 high-speed tractors and 2.5-ton trucks could road march 160 miles per day under favorable conditions. The tactical implications were catastrophic. In Normandy, German artillery units that survived Allied air attacks often arrived at the front too late to affect the battle. When they did arrive, they were firing captured French, Polish, Soviet, and Italian guns, each requiring different ammunition, different firing tables, different maintenance procedures. General Hans Eberbach, commanding 5th Panzer Army, later wrote that his artillery included guns from every major power in Europe. The Americans, by contrast, fielded 4 standard tube artillery pieces: the 105 mm M2A1 howitzer, the 155 mm M1 howitzer, the 4.5-inch gun, and the 155 mm long tom. Ammunition was standardized. Crews were interchangeable. Supply was predictable. The Wehrmacht couldn't compete. By early June 1944, the German High Command knew the invasion was coming. They didn't know where. What they did know from prisoner interrogations and signals intelligence was that wherever the Allies landed, American artillery would be there in force. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, issued a tactical directive on June 2, 1944, emphasizing the need for German units to remain dispersed and concealed during preparatory bombardments and to expect rapid coordinated fire from multiple unseen batteries. It was an admission of helplessness. On June 6th, Allied forces landed at Normandy, supported by the fire of hundreds of artillery battalions. Within 72 hours, 12 American artillery battalions were ashore and operational. Within a week, the number had tripled. By late June, American divisions in Normandy could call on over 200 battalions of tube artillery, plus naval gunfire, plus close air support. The Germans called it Materialschlacht, a battle of materiel. But materiel wasn't the whole story. At 0550 hours on July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra began with a 30-minute artillery bombardment near St. Lo. More than 1,000 American guns fired in coordination. General Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the elite Panzer Division, was 5 kilometers behind the front when the bombardment began. His division, considered one of the Wehrmacht's finest, had 183 tanks, 40 assault guns, and over 14,000 men. By noon on July 25th, Panzer had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Bayerlein later described the battlefield as a moonscape where everything was burned and destroyed. Not the bombing, not the tanks, the artillery. Bayerlein survived. His division did not. Remnants straggled eastward with fewer than 30 operational armored vehicles. In less than a day, American artillery had gutted an elite panzer division that had fought across North Africa, Italy, and France. The reports went straight to Berlin. What they revealed was worse than the loss of a single division. Panzer had been destroyed by a technique the Germans couldn't replicate. Massed artillery fire controlled through centralized fire direction centers, coordinated with air observation, delivered with a speed that made defense impossible. The Wehrmacht had no counter. Something else had happened. Someone new was in command. By late July, Allied spearheads were tearing through Normandy faster than German reserves could respond. Counterattacks that should have sealed penetrations were shattered by artillery before they even reached the front. German units attempting to withdraw were caught in the open by forward observers in L4 Cubs and destroyed by TOT chutes. At the height of the Falaise pocket in August 1944, American artillery battalions fired an average of 1,200 rounds per gun. over 4 days. The Germans couldn't retreat fast enough. Prisoners captured after Falaise told interrogators the same story. We couldn't move during the day. We couldn't move at night. The artillery was everywhere. One underscore Panzer Grenadier underscore said simply, "We learned to stop moving when we heard the airplane engines." It was the sound of death. Within days of the breakout from Normandy, American artillery faced its sternest test. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes. Hitler's last great offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, began with a surprise assault by 3 German armies against a lightly held American front. In the chaos of the first 72 hours, German units made significant gains. Entire American regiments were surrounded, supply lines were cut, panic spread. But at a place called Elsenborn Ridge, the German advance stopped cold. The U.S., 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions, supported by artillery from V Corps, turned the northern shoulder of the German offensive into a killing ground. Over 10 days, American artillery fired more than 100,000 rounds in support of the ridge defense. German assault troops advancing through the snow were met with curtains of steel. And on December 26, the Americans introduced a weapon the Germans had never seen before, the VT proximity fuse. Developed in secret, the VT fuse used a miniature radar transmitter to detonate artillery shells in midair just above the target. No timing adjustments. No guesswork. The shells simply exploded when they sensed they were near the ground or near troops in the open. The effect on infantry was catastrophic. At Elsenborn, German units advancing in close formation were slaughtered by airbursts they couldn't anticipate. Prisoners reported that entire platoons were wiped out by single top missions using VT-fused shells. One German sergeant captured on December 28 said, "We thought it was some new kind of bomb. Then we realized it was their artillery. But it was exploding over our heads." Over 200,000 VT-fused rounds were fired during the Bulge. The Wehrmacht had no equivalent. For months, German commanders had known they were losing the artillery battle. After the war, interrogators asked captured generals to assess American weapons and tactics. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who had commanded German forces in the West, was blunt. "The American artillery was a problem we could not solve." General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein went further. The speed of American artillery was terrifying. They could place fire anywhere, instantly. Even more telling were the tactical assessments found in German war diaries. The Wehrmacht had studied American artillery techniques throughout the war and understood, intellectually, what the Americans were doing. German fire direction doctrine wasn't fundamentally different. German guns were comparable in range and lethality. What the Germans couldn't replicate was the system. The radios that allowed instantaneous communication between observers and fire direction centers, the trucks and tractors that gave American artillery strategic mobility, the industrial base that kept ammunition flowing to the guns in unimaginable quantities, the standardization that allowed any observer to call fire from any battalion, the training centers like Fort Sill that produced thousands of artillerymen trained to the same exacting standard, and the sheer abundance. By March 1945, the U.S. Army had 125 artillery battalions in Europe alone. Each battalion could deliver devastating fire in minutes. Together, they formed a web of overlapping fire zones that covered the entire front. German units couldn't maneuver, couldn't concentrate, couldn't counterattack without being detected and destroyed. At the Remagen bridgehead in March 1945, German artillery attempting to shell the captured bridge was systematically hunted and destroyed by American counter-battery fire directed from air observation posts. Over 4 days, 32 German batteries were silenced. The Wehrmacht was blind and mute. So why did German generals fear American artillery more than anything else? The answer arrived in the doctrinal manuals American artillerymen carried into battle. American artillery doctrine emphasized 3 principles: speed, mass, and flexibility. Speed meant getting fire on target faster than the enemy could react. Mass meant concentrating overwhelming firepower at decisive points. Flexibility meant shifting fires rapidly as the battle evolved. German doctrine emphasized deliberate planning and precision. It worked brilliantly when there was time to plan, and when the enemy cooperated by fighting a predictable battle. But the Americans didn't fight that way. They moved too fast, attacked too unpredictably, called fire too quickly. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht had adapted its infantry tactics, improved its anti-tank defenses, and learned to exploit American weaknesses in armored combat. But it never solved the artillery problem, because there was no solution. The American system was built on industrial scale, technological superiority, and institutional training that took years to develop. Germany couldn't match it in 1943, couldn't match it in 1944. By 1945, Germany had lost the trained crews, the horses, the trucks, the ammunition, and the fuel needed to make artillery effective at all. The Americans just kept firing. General George S. Patton said it after the war, "I do not have to tell you who won the war. You know. The artillery did." He was right. American infantry broke through German defenses. American armor exploited the breakthroughs. American aircraft dominated the skies. But it was American artillery that made all of it possible. It shattered German counterattacks before they began. It destroyed German reserves as they moved to the front. It made German defensive positions untenable and German withdrawals into massacres. It killed more German soldiers than any other American weapon, and it did so with a speed, precision, and volume that the Wehrmacht called worse than hell itself. Because hell at least gave warning, American artillery just appeared, instant, overwhelming, and everywhere at once. The Germans never saw it coming. By the time they understood what they were facing, the war was already over.